Hey everyone, before we dive in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. The algorithm really loves that engagement and it helps me bring you more stories just like this one. Now, let me tell you something. I'm a dermatologist at Valley Medical Center in Phoenix, Arizona, or at least I was until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Dr. Sarah Chen if you want, though most patients at the clinic just called me the skin doctor during my 15 years there. I've seen everything you can imagine in dermatology: melanomas, basal cell carcinomas, psoriasis flare-ups, severe acne cases, and every kind of skin condition the human body can develop. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about dermatology and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Valley Medical is a comprehensive dermatology practice serving the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. It's a modern facility built in the early 2000s with 12 examination rooms and a surgical suite that handles everything from routine mole removals to complex reconstructive procedures. During my time there, I specialized in medical dermatology, focusing on skin cancers, inflammatory conditions, and unusual presentations that required deeper investigation. I prided myself on being able to diagnose even the most obscure skin disorders, often consulting on cases that had stumped other physicians in the region. The case I'm about to describe began on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning in late October 2023. It was the kind of crisp autumn day that makes Phoenix bearable after the brutal summer heat. I had been in practice long enough to appreciate these cooler months when patients weren't coming in with heat rashes and sun poisoning every other appointment. My schedule that day was typical for a Tuesday. A few follow-up appointments for patients undergoing treatment, a couple of suspicious mole checks, and what my assistant Maria had noted as a consultation for tattoo-related skin concerns. I remember reviewing the appointment notes before seeing the patient. The chart simply said adult male, age 32, requesting evaluation of unusual changes around a recent tattoo. Nothing particularly noteworthy there. Tattoo-related complications were routine in my practice. I'd seen everything from allergic reactions to specific ink colors to bacterial infections from unsterile equipment. Most of these cases were straightforward to diagnose and treat. At 2:15 that Tuesday afternoon, Maria knocked on my office door and let me know that my next patient had arrived. His name was Marcus Webb, and according to the intake forms, he had gotten a tattoo approximately 6 weeks earlier and was experiencing some concerning changes to the area. I gathered my examination tools and headed to room 7, expecting another routine consultation about post-tattoo healing issues. When I entered the examination room, I found a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, well-groomed, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. He seemed nervous, which wasn't unusual for patients dealing with skin concerns, especially when they involved recent body modifications like tattoos. What struck me immediately was how articulate and intelligent he appeared when he began describing his situation. "Good afternoon, Mr. Webb. I'm Dr. Chen. I understand you're having some concerns about a recent tattoo. Can you tell me a bit about what's been happening?" He shifted slightly in the examination chair and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing his forearm. What I saw there was unlike anything I had encountered in 15 years of dermatological practice, and I had seen some truly unusual tattoo complications over the years. The tattoo itself appeared to be a geometric design, roughly 4 inches square, located on the outer aspect of his left forearm. But calling it simply geometric doesn't do justice to what I was looking at. The design consisted of intricate interconnected lines forming what appeared to be a complex pattern that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle and lighting. It was executed in what looked like standard black ink, with exceptional precision and detail that suggested the work of a highly skilled tattoo artist. But that wasn't what made this case unusual. What caught my attention immediately were the changes occurring in the skin around and within the tattoo. The normal healing process for a tattoo involves some initial redness, swelling, and scabbing that gradually resolves over 2 to 4 weeks. What I was seeing on Marcus's arm was completely different from typical tattoo healing. The skin within the tattooed area appeared to be moving. Not dramatically, but there was a subtle, continuous shifting pattern that seemed to follow the lines of the tattoo design. It was as if the ink beneath the skin was somehow alive, creating gentle undulations and movements that were clearly visible to the naked eye. The surrounding skin showed no signs of inflammation, infection, or allergic reaction that I would typically expect with problematic tattoos. "Mr. Webb, how long have you been noticing this movement in the tattooed area?" I asked, trying to maintain my professional composure while processing what I was observing. "It started about 2 weeks after I got the tattoo," he replied. "At first, I thought it was just normal healing, maybe some fluid under the skin or something, but it's gotten more pronounced over the past few weeks, and now it happens constantly. It doesn't hurt and it doesn't itch. It just moves." I began my examination using standard dermatological assessment techniques. I palpated the area gently, checking for any underlying masses, fluid collections, or irregularities in the skin texture. What I felt was even more puzzling than what I could see. The skin felt completely normal in terms of temperature and texture, but there was definitely movement occurring beneath the surface. It felt like something was flowing or shifting under the skin in patterns that corresponded exactly to the tattoo design. "Can you tell me about the tattoo parlor where you had this done?" I asked. "Do you remember the artist's name? What kind of ink they used?" "That's where things get a bit strange," Marcus said, his expression becoming more troubled. "I went to a place called Crimson Canvas downtown. The artist said his name was Vincent, but when I went back there last week to ask about this, the shop was completely empty. The landlord said the tenant had left suddenly without notice, and no one seemed to know where they went." I made notes about this information while continuing my examination. Using a dermatoscope, I examined the tattooed area under magnification and different lighting conditions. What I saw through the lens defied medical explanation. The ink appeared to be moving in organized patterns beneath the skin, creating fluid, wave-like motions that followed the geometric lines of the design. It was as if the tattoo was some kind of living entity rather than static pigment deposited in the dermis. "Have you experienced any other symptoms?" I asked. "Any changes in sensation? Any systemic effects like fever, fatigue, or changes in your overall health?" "No, nothing like that," Marcus replied. "I feel completely normal otherwise. It's just this constant movement that's really starting to worry me. And sometimes late at night when the room is quiet, I swear I can feel it more intensely, like there's something trying to communicate." That last comment sent a chill down my spine, though I tried not to show it. In my years of practice, I had never encountered anything remotely similar to what I was observing. I decided to take photographs for documentation and further analysis, though I made sure to get Marcus's written consent first. As I prepared my camera equipment, I began to notice something else that would prove to be even more disturbing. The movement patterns in the tattoo seemed to be responding to external stimuli. When I shined my examination light directly on the area, the movements became more rapid and seemed to concentrate around the light source. When I moved the light away, the pattern shifted and appeared to follow the light's movement. "Mr. Webb, I want you to look at this," I said, demonstrating the light response phenomenon. "Watch how the movement changes when I shine the light in different areas." Marcus watched with obvious fascination and growing concern, as the tattoo appeared to react to the light stimulus like some kind of primitive organism seeking or avoiding illumination. "This is what's been happening at home too," he said quietly. "It responds to different things, bright lights, temperature changes, even sound sometimes. It's like it's aware of what's happening around it." I spent the next hour conducting the most thorough examination I had ever performed on a tattoo. I tested the area's response to various stimuli, documented the movement patterns, and took extensive photographs and video recordings. Every test I performed confirmed what seemed impossible from a medical standpoint. The tattooed area was exhibiting behaviors that suggested some form of consciousness or responsiveness that had no basis in known dermatological science. The more I examined Marcus's tattoo, the more questions arose in my mind. How was this possible? What kind of ink could create these effects? Was this some kind of new biotechnology that I wasn't familiar with? And most disturbing of all, if this tattoo was somehow alive or responsive, what were its intentions? I concluded that initial appointment by scheduling Marcus for a battery of additional tests. I wanted blood work to check for any unusual substances or immune responses, imaging studies to see what was happening beneath the skin surface, and consultations with colleagues in other specialties who might have insights I was missing. As Marcus left my office that day, I found myself staring at the photographs I had taken, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. In 15 years of dermatological practice, I had never encountered anything that challenged my understanding of skin physiology and wound healing to this degree. What I didn't know at the time was that this was only the beginning of the most disturbing case of my medical career, and that the answers I would eventually discover would force me to question not just my understanding of dermatology, but my understanding of reality itself. That evening, I found myself unable to concentrate on anything else. I kept reviewing the photographs and video recordings I had taken of Marcus's tattoo, trying to find some rational explanation for what I had observed. I reached out to colleagues at other medical centers, dermatologists who specialized in unusual skin conditions, and even contacted researchers at the University of Arizona who studied biomedical engineering applications in dermatology. Nobody had ever seen anything like what I was documenting. Dr. Jennifer Walsh at Mayo Clinic, whom I had known since residency, suggested that perhaps I was dealing with some kind of parasitic infection that could cause movement beneath the skin. Dr. Richard Torres, a dermatopathologist in Los Angeles, theorized that maybe the tattoo artist had somehow introduced living organisms into the ink, though he admitted he had no idea what kind of organisms could survive in tattoo ink and create such organized movement patterns. The following week, Marcus returned for his scheduled follow-up appointments and additional testing. When I examined him again, the movements had become more pronounced and seemed to follow increasingly complex patterns. What had initially appeared to be random shifting was beginning to look more organized, more purposeful. During this second appointment, I decided to try something that would prove to be a critical turning point in understanding this case. I asked Marcus to concentrate on the tattoo and try to mentally direct the movement patterns while I observed and recorded the results. "Just focus on the area and see if you can influence what's happening there," I instructed. Positioning my camera to capture any changes, Marcus closed his eyes and placed his right hand over the tattooed area without touching it. What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. The movement patterns immediately became more organized and appeared to respond to his mental focus. When he concentrated on the upper portion of the design, the activity intensified in that specific area. When he shifted his attention to different parts of the tattoo, the movement followed his focus with remarkable precision. "This is incredible," I said, "documenting everything. It's responding to your thoughts. How long have you been able to do this?" "I only discovered it a few days ago," Marcus replied, his eyes still closed in concentration. I was lying in bed trying to ignore the movement, and I started mentally telling it to be still. Instead of stopping, it seemed to respond to what I was thinking. It's like there's some kind of connection between my mind and whatever is happening in the tattoo. The implications of what I was witnessing were staggering. If the tattoo was somehow interfacing with Marcus's nervous system, we were dealing with technology or biological processes that were far beyond current medical understanding. I immediately scheduled him for a comprehensive neurological evaluation and advanced imaging studies to see if there were any changes in his brain activity or nervous system function. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a neurologist at Valley Medical, agreed to consult on Marcus's case. His initial neurological examination was completely normal, but when we showed him the video recordings of the tattoo's response to mental commands, he was as baffled as I was. "I've never seen anything like this in neurology," Dr. Rodriguez told me privately after examining Marcus. "The idea that a tattoo could interface with the nervous system is theoretically possible, but we don't have the technology to create something like this. At least, not that I'm aware of." We proceeded with brain MRI studies and EEG monitoring while Marcus attempted to control the tattoo movement. The results showed increased activity in areas of his brain associated with motor control and sensory processing when he focused on the tattoo, but there was no obvious pathway connecting his nervous system to the tattooed area. 2 weeks after that appointment, Marcus called my office in a state of panic. Maria took the call and immediately put him through to me because of the urgency in his voice. "Dr. Chen, something's happening. The tattoo is doing things on its own now, without me trying to control it, and it's not just moving anymore. I think it's trying to show me something." I told Marcus to come in immediately, and when he arrived 30 minutes later, I could see that he was genuinely frightened. The tattoo had changed dramatically since his last visit. The geometric pattern now appeared to be constantly shifting and rearranging itself into different configurations. As I watched, the lines seemed to form recognizable shapes and symbols before dissolving back into the original geometric design. "Marcus, how long has this been happening?" I asked, preparing my recording equipment. "It started 3 days ago. At first, it was just more active than usual, but then it began forming these patterns that look almost like pictures or symbols. And last night, I swear, it formed letters, like it was trying to spell something out." I spent the next 2 hours documenting the tattoo's behavior. The movements had indeed become more complex and appeared to be forming deliberate patterns and shapes. I watched as the design transformed into what looked like astronomical symbols, mathematical equations, and geometric forms that seemed to follow some kind of logical sequence. Most disturbing of all was when the tattoo appeared to form letters. Over the course of several minutes, I watched as the shifting lines spelled out words: listen, understand, connection, bridge. The words would form clearly enough to be read, hold their shape for several seconds, then dissolve back into the flowing geometric patterns. "Marcus, have you been having any unusual dreams or experiences since this started?" I asked, trying to understand if there might be psychological components to what we were observing. "Actually, yes, I've been having incredibly vivid dreams about places I've never been. Complex geometric structures, like cities made of mathematical formulas and patterns. And in these dreams, I feel like something is trying to teach me or show me something important, but I can never quite understand what it is when I wake up." I was beginning to realize that this case was far beyond anything that conventional dermatology could address. The tattoo was exhibiting behaviors that suggested it was some kind of communication device or interface technology that was interacting directly with Marcus's consciousness. That evening, I made the difficult decision to contact federal health authorities. What we were dealing with potentially involved unknown technology or biological agents that could have implications for public health and safety. I also reached out to colleagues in research institutions who specialized in biomedical engineering and consciousness studies. Dr. Patricia Reeves at the National Institutes of Health agreed to review my documentation and consult on the case. Her initial response was skeptical, but after reviewing the video recordings and medical data, she agreed that we were dealing with something unprecedented that required investigation at the highest levels. Within a week, Marcus's case had attracted attention from researchers across multiple disciplines. Neuroscientists, biomedical engineers, materials scientists, and even theoretical physicists were requesting access to the documentation and asking to examine Marcus directly. But before any of these consultations could take place, something happened that would change everything and ultimately lead to my decision to leave medicine entirely. Marcus called me on a Friday evening, and his voice sounded different, more focused, more intense than I had ever heard it before. "Dr. Chen, I need to see you immediately. The tattoo has made contact. I know what it is now, and I know what it wants, but I don't think we're ready for this information." I told Marcus to meet me at the clinic immediately, despite it being well past normal business hours. Something in his voice told me this couldn't wait until Monday morning. I drove to Valley Medical with a growing sense of unease, my mind racing through possibilities of what he might have discovered about his condition. When I arrived at the clinic around 8:30 that Friday evening, Marcus was already waiting in the parking lot. As I approached him under the fluorescent security lights, I could see that something fundamental had changed about his demeanor. He moved with a strange confidence, almost like he was carrying knowledge that was too heavy for one person to bear alone. "Dr. Chen, thank you for meeting me so late," he said as I unlocked the clinic doors. "What I'm about to show you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to document everything. I think this information needs to be preserved, just in case something happens to me." We made our way to examination room 7, the same room where I had first encountered his unusual tattoo. As Marcus rolled up his sleeve, I immediately noticed that the tattoo had changed again. The geometric pattern was now more complex than ever, with layers of interconnected designs that seemed to extend deeper into his skin than should have been physically possible. Over the past 3 days, Marcus explained, the communications have become much clearer. It's not just forming letters and symbols anymore. It's directly interfacing with my thoughts, sharing information that I couldn't possibly have known before. "Marcus, that sounds like you might be experiencing some psychological effects from the stress of this situation," I said gently. "Sometimes when we're dealing with unexplained medical conditions, our minds can create explanations that feel very real, but aren't necessarily based in reality." He looked at me with an expression that was both patient and slightly pitying. "Dr. Chen, I want you to ask me any question about dermatology. Any technical question that I couldn't possibly know the answer to as someone without medical training." I was taken aback by this request, but decided to humor him. "Okay, Marcus. Can you tell me about the molecular structure of melanin and how it's synthesized in melanocytes?" Without hesitation, Marcus began explaining the complex biochemical pathways involved in melanin production, using precise medical terminology and describing processes that would challenge even advanced dermatology residents. He discussed tyrosinase activity, the role of tyrosine in pigment formation, and the differences between eumelanin and pheomelanin, with the accuracy of someone who had spent years studying dermatological biochemistry. I stared at him in shock. "Marcus, how could you possibly know that information?" "The tattoo has been downloading information directly into my consciousness," he replied calmly. "Not just about dermatology, but about fields of science that humans haven't even developed yet. Materials science, consciousness studies, interdimensional physics. I know how that sounds, but I need you to understand what we're dealing with here." As he spoke, I watched the tattoo pattern shift and change, forming what appeared to be complex diagrams and equations. The movements were no longer random or even semi-organized. They were precise, purposeful, like a display screen showing technical schematics. Marcus continued. The entity communicating through this tattoo isn't from our world. It's from a dimension where consciousness and matter interact in ways we can't currently comprehend. They've been trying to establish communication with humans for decades, but our technology and understanding weren't advanced enough to create a proper interface. This is where the story gets truly disturbing, and why I ultimately couldn't continue practicing medicine after this case. Marcus explained that the tattoo artist, Vincent, had been contacted by this interdimensional entity and given specific instructions for creating what was essentially a biological communication device. The ink wasn't ordinary tattoo ink at all, but a complex nanomaterial that could interface directly with human neural tissue. The geometric design wasn't decorative either. It was a precisely calculated pattern that created the necessary conditions for consciousness transfer between dimensions. Marcus had unknowingly volunteered to become a communication bridge between our reality and something that existed outside our normal understanding of physics and biology. Dr. Chen, they want to help humanity advance, but they're concerned about our readiness for the knowledge they possess. The tattoo has been evaluating my psychological stability and our species' capacity to handle interdimensional contact without causing panic or misuse of the technology. I found myself in an impossible position. Everything Marcus was telling me sounded like the delusions of someone experiencing a psychological break. But the evidence before my eyes, the knowledge he was demonstrating, and the physical changes in the tattoo itself suggested something far more complex than mental illness. Over the next 2 hours, Marcus demonstrated abilities that defied explanation. He could control the tattoo's movements with perfect precision, causing it to form detailed anatomical diagrams, chemical formulas, and even what appeared to be blueprints for technology that didn't exist in our world. When I tested his knowledge by asking increasingly complex medical questions, he answered each one with an accuracy that suggested access to information beyond human medical understanding. The most unsettling part was when Marcus looked directly at me and said, "Dr. Chen, they know about your research into consciousness and skin sensitivity from your residency. They know about the paper you never published because the results couldn't be replicated. They want you to know that your instincts were correct, but human science isn't advanced enough to measure what you were detecting." He was referring to research I had conducted 15 years earlier during my dermatology residency, work that I had never discussed with anyone and had abandoned because the results seemed impossible to explain or duplicate. The fact that Marcus knew about this convinced me that something genuinely extraordinary was occurring, regardless of how impossible it seemed. But what happened next changed everything and ultimately led to my resignation from medicine. Marcus suddenly grabbed his left arm and doubled over in apparent pain. The tattoo began moving violently, the pattern shifting and churning like something was fighting to escape from beneath his skin. "Dr. Chen, something's wrong," he gasped. "They're trying to withdraw the connection. They say there's been interference, that other entities have detected the communication bridge and are trying to access it. They need to sever the link immediately before something dangerous comes through." I watched in horror as the tattoo began to fade before my eyes. The intricate patterns that had been so vivid and active started dissolving, the black ink appearing to evaporate from Marcus's skin like smoke. Within minutes, his forearm showed nothing but faint gray marks where the complex geometric design had been. Marcus collapsed into the examination chair, unconscious. I immediately checked his vital signs and found them stable, but he remained unresponsive for nearly an hour. When he finally woke up, he looked around the room with confusion and asked me why he was at the medical clinic so late at night. "Marcus, do you remember anything about your tattoo? About the communications you were describing?" I asked carefully. "What tattoo?" he replied, looking at his left forearm where only faint traces remained of what had been an elaborate design. "I was thinking about getting a tattoo recently, but I haven't decided on a design yet." He had no memory of the past 2 months, no recollection of the moving tattoo, the interdimensional communications, or the knowledge he had demonstrated just hours earlier. It was as if his entire experience had been erased, leaving only the fading physical evidence that something extraordinary had occurred. I drove Marcus home that night, and he seemed genuinely puzzled about why he had been at my clinic. Over the following weeks, I checked on him regularly, but he remained completely unaware of what had transpired. The faint marks on his arm continued to fade until there was no visible evidence that he had ever been tattooed at all. I spent months trying to process what I had witnessed and documented. The video recordings I had taken showed nothing but normal skin with a standard tattoo. The photographs revealed no unusual movement or pattern changes. Even the audio recordings of our conversations had been somehow altered, containing only routine discussions about normal tattoo healing processes. Every piece of physical evidence of the extraordinary events had been erased or modified, leaving me with nothing but my own memories and the profound psychological impact of the experience. I consulted with colleagues about what I remembered, but without supporting evidence, my account sounded exactly like what I had initially suspected in Marcus, the delusions of someone under extreme stress. I resigned from Valley Medical 3 weeks later because I could no longer trust my own judgment as a physician. How do you continue practicing medicine when you've witnessed something that challenges every principle of medical science, but you have no way to prove it actually happened? How do you examine patients when you know there might be realities and possibilities that exist completely outside our understanding of biology and consciousness? The case of Marcus Webb taught me that there are mysteries in this world that medicine simply cannot explain or contain. Whether what I experienced was real interdimensional contact or an elaborate psychological breakdown, I'll never know for certain. But I do know that some cases change you so fundamentally that you can never go back to seeing the world the same way. I moved to a small town in Colorado where I now work as a general practitioner, treating routine ailments and avoiding any cases that might challenge my already shaken understanding of reality. But late at night, when I'm alone with my thoughts,